of the swords of the ancients and the fifth age of Ammon. The ancient ones were born to the world of Ammon with the enchanted powers of creation and destruction bestowed upon them by the Anath. Those powers prevented the world from decaying into desolation and ruin. Knowing that their time would eventually come to an end, the ancient ones did not trust their powers to be passed on to those of mortal flesh. Flesh could be tempted and corrupted, and the great powers left by the Anath could be twisted and altered for ill use, destroying the delicate balance of the world. The ancients trusted in steel mined from the very earth forged by the Creator, the Anath. The ancients had instilled within mortals the knowledge to work steel into tools and blades. Mortals learned to use those blades with great care, for havoc could be brought with but a quick stroke, or calm by staying a blade in its scabbard. A balance was learned, and the threat of unsheathing a blade was more often than not what kept the peace. But there were times when steel was drawn by greed or corruption. The steel of the ancients was stronger than flesh, stronger than the will, even stronger than time. Only in this steel could the powers of the ancients be trusted, for steel could not be destroyed, only reshaped. Steel would not betray its power for good or ill. The wielder alone, moral or evil, held that choice. But the ancient ones knew that if steel were possessed of the perfect balance of powers, that under wise use, order and harmony would remain in Ammon for eternity. The fashioning of steel into weapons and tools became a high art among mortals, and there were many greatly skilled elven smiths in Ammon. Thus, the ancient ones directed the creation of the 10 swords of the ancients, and Ammon entered the fifth age, the age of order. The dark elves, dwellers of the underworld, were the mortals so commanded to create those 10 swords. These were the finest smiths in all of Ammon, and were masters in the workings of steel, for they had uncovered its mystery in their time under the earth. The blades of those great swords were forged of secret alloys mined from the depths of Ammon, and they were shaped and tempered in the methods taught by the ancients. Each of the 10 swords were bequeathed special powers by the ancient ones, and those powers were granted to the wielder, but the wielder alone decided if that power was to be used for good or evil. As these were talismans of power, the designs were more of a ceremonial nature, crafted with intricate engravings and ornate decorations, not meant for practical use. However, there were times when several of the swords were used as actual weapons of combat. Each blade was given a name for its power, and those names were thus: Kilgorin, the Sword of Darkness. It gave the wielder power to bring darkness and enchantment over one's enemies. It derived its strength from the Neverworld and was possessed of a great evil by many years of use by the Dark One. It was lost in the depths in the last battle. Elex Orien, the Sword of War. It gave the wielder strategic power and command to unify great multitudes for a single cause. Forged by Magnim, it was used in the Black War by Queen Valen. It was lost in the depths in the last battle. Morthoseth, the Sword of the Shadows. It influenced mortals by its power over the shadow world of thoughts and dreams. It was wielded by Vardor and Borloth in the War of the Shadows. It was lost in the depths in the last battle. Luciendar, the Sword of Light. It revealed to the user that which was hidden and showed the true nature of creatures, both natural and enchanted. It was wielded by Baladir in the War of the Shadows. It was lost in the depths in the last battle. Anathros, the Sword of the Earth. It gave the user power to reshape the earth and its elements, and was wielded by the king of the Uldurin and later by Alwyn in the Shadow War. It was lost in the depths in the last battle. Valermos, the Sword of Fire. It gave the user the ability to command creatures in spirit form and created and controlled the flames of Ammon. It was wielded by Vardor in the Shadow War. It was lost in the depths in the last battle. Sinthork, the Sword of Justice. Sinthork had the power to deal just punishment to wrongdoers, seen through the eyes of the wielder as being wrongful. It was wielded by the sorceress Morgolien in the extermination of the Mithrodin and later by Valen. It was lost in the depths in the last battle. Molotok, the Slayer sword. The user received boundless skill and speed from the sacred blade, as well as great focused rage to beat down an enemy. Mere mortals could not even lift this enchanted weapon. It was wielded by Negulus in the slaying of the Mithrodin. What became of this sword after Negulus wielded it is not known. Avaquar, the sword of the deep. Avaquar held power over the waters and seas. It was forged by Magnim and was the mate of Anathar. Valen wielded it, and it was lost in the depths in the last battle. Anathar, the sword of power. The last of the 10 swords to be forged, Anathar held within it a part of each of the powers of the other 9. It was forged by the elf Tukol and used to imprison the spirit of the Dark One. Valen kept it to the end of her days. Anathar was the strongest of the 10 swords and held a link to each of the others. When together, the 10 swords allowed the ancients to have the power of dominion over the lands and all living things in Ammon, to create harmony and order in the world, and the Ancient Ones taught only the wisest of mortals in their use. Thence there was a time of peace when mortals founded the great realms. Men created the north realm of Daelund, the east realm of Daelindor, and the south realm of Ammonach, and the dark elves created the realm of Laconia in the underworld. The Uldurin, always prone to war, had been defeated by men and were driven across the sea to the Northlands where they founded the kingdom of Ulain. Men built great sailing ships and explored all of the lands across the seas, Loringel in the south, Dagorlund in the east, and Uliok of the frozen north. In this time, the blades of chaos, bane to mortals, were gathered by the Ancient Ones and locked in a stronghold of the Temple of the Anath to prevent their use. But some of those blades were lost to them and remained hidden until later days of the Fifth Age. For many years the 12 immortal Ancient Ones reigned over Ammon until their outcast brother, Evruk the Dark One, arose from the underworld with the Orwenok and stole Kilgorin, the Sword of Darkness, from the Temple of the Anath. With that enchanted sword he attempted to enslave men, but the ancients intervened, and a great conflict ensued, the Battle of the Ancients. 6 of the remaining 12 Ancient Ones perished by the hand of the Dark One and his Orwenok beasts, but the Dark One was horribly scarred in the foray. Men and elves rallied to the Ancients' cause and helped to defeat the Orwenok, but many of those horrid beasts escaped and hid themselves. The Ancients hunted for the Dark One many years thereafter, but he was cunning and eluded their gaze. In the 82nd year of the Fifth Age, the Ancients came to discover the hiding place of the Dark One in the frozen northern realm of Uliok, where he had built a dark kingdom and commanded an army of Uldurin bent to his cause. There he was at last defeated with the Sword of Power, Anathar, and his army decimated, but his own Sword of Power, Kilgorin, was not recovered. To save himself, the Dark One betrayed the secret abode of the Orwenok to the Ancients. But he would not tell of whence they came into the world, or how they had been created. To protect Ammon, lest the Dark One gain influence yet again, the Ancients combined their powers and opened a doorway to the Neverworld, Avalos, their old haven before the Anath released them into the world of Ammon to rule. It was a place half in and half out of the world, where one can be seen as if in a mist, but never to be heard or touched from this world. And there, the Dark One was imprisoned. The Blade of Chaos, Umathar, was made the key to the door of the Neverworld, and it was hidden away in the frozen lands of the north. In order to bestow that power upon its blade, a part of the power of each Ancient One had to be conferred upon it. The secret hiding place of the Orwenok the Dark One had revealed was high in the Tellurian mountains, east of Daelund, and it was there that the forces of the Ancient Ones, allied with men and elves, assailed them. Unknown to the ancients, the numbers of those beasts had increased greatly in the years that they had remained hidden, and they counted near 2,000. Thus the forces of the Ancient Ones were not prepared for the battle, and 3 of the 6 remaining ancients were slain, and thousands of mortal lives were lost. The conflict was long and bloody, but in the end, the ancients were triumphant and succeeded in driving the Orwenok that survived that battle, but 10 score, deep into the underground caverns of Laconia. Fearing for the 3 remaining ancients, and at the urging of the Ancient One known as Atnal, mortal men and elves thence created the Order of the Mithrodin in the 133rd year of the 5th Age. The Mithrodin were charged to watch over the Ancient Ones and care for the 10 swords, whence the time came that the ancients would perish into the shadows, leaving the mortal world forever. The Mithrodin, or myth as they were called in later days, were a highly secretive cadre of man and elf warriors, protectors in service to the great realms. They were made to guard the sacred swords and were given full knowledge by the ancients of the sword's lore, and how to harness the power with which each blade was bestowed, and thus they were granted complete understanding of the mystery of enchanted steel. It was the duty of the Mithrodin to keep order and balance in Ammon by directing their use. Each sword required counterbalance by its opposite. When a sword of power was used to shift the balance in Ammon, the myth, through careful counsel and deliberation, would release the opposing sword into the world to counter it. They alone were responsible for recovering and protecting any sword that would fall into misuse. But Kilgorin, the sword of Evruk the Dark One, they never found. The Mithrodin made their homeland in Dalindor, and it was there the 9 known swords were kept, but they later created many other grand temples and halls throughout the great realm with which the swords were dispersed. Over the 200 years that followed, the Orwenok beasts once again became a threat to mortals, for their numbers had grown in the underworld and they had spread to the surface. The southern ranges of Dailund were assailed by those horrid beasts, and they devoured many men and crushed many towns and cities into ruin. Thus the ancients decreed that the Orwenok must be utterly destroyed and rid from Ammon completely, or there would be no peace. Thence, in the 333rd year of the 5th Age, there was another great battle fought by men and elves, and the Mithrodin came wielding the swords of power and other sacred blades alongside the ancient ones, and they used all of their might to defeat the Orwenok. As before, many thousands of mortals perished in that battle, and one of the 3 remaining ancient ones did die at the fangs of those dark beasts. But in the depths of Laconia, the ancient one, Atnal, harnessed the power of Umethar to open the gates of Avalos, the Neverworld. When the Orwenok retreated once again into their deep caverns, they unwittingly entered the Neverworld, for Atnal had made its opening the entrance to those caves, and the bulk of that horde became entrapped there. The ancient ones sealed the door, and thus those abominations were at last rid from Ammon. Unbeknownst to the ancient ones, a dark spirit had escaped from the Neverworld when that gate was opened, and it was the diminished form of the Dark One, Evruk. A part of that ancient one resided within several enchanted blades that were hidden in Ammon, giving him the power to escape Avalos. For many years that evil soul crafted himself whole again into a new body, though he was horrible in appearance. In the 349th year of the 5th Age, he recovered his mighty sword, Kilgorin, from its hiding place, and his power was near whole again. Thence he travelled west, across the sea, into the dark lands of Dagorlund, fearing the wrath of the ancients should he be discovered. He veiled himself in the form of an elven lord, handsome and tall in stature, and he glowed with the light of the ancients. There he recruited a new army of men to do his bidding, and he corrupted their minds and souls. Many years thereafter, the Dark One came upon a hidden city in the deserts to the east in Dagorlund, a city later named Naznandos. Living there were many immortals possessed of strange powers, and these were the first immortal sorcerers in Ammon, of whom the Dark One knew quite well. None of the sorcerers knew of whence they came or how they became immortal, but it was rumoured among them that these were the lost daughters and sons of the Dark One when he was known as Evruk, and that they were spawned from his union with many mortal women in the early ages of Ammon. One of these sorcerers was Methusia, once one of the most beautiful and wisest women in all of Ammon, and she was the first to discover she possessed strange oracular sight and powers likened to those of the ancients. She had been thought to be an abomination by mortal men and elves and was ousted from their lands, as were others of her kind. She appealed to the ancients for help, but they spat on her and cast her out, for they knew who had spawned her brood, and that one was Evruk, her father. Thus she attempted to change her form to that of an acolyte of the ancients, to live amongst them. But they soon saw through her guise, and a curse was put upon her by the ancients, for using this sorcery and trickery. Thenceforward, she was to bear a horrid form that was deathly for men to gaze upon. Over time, her wisdom turned bitter, and she learned to hate all mortals and ancient ones alike, for she blamed them for her plight. The Dark One befriended her in later days, and he conjured up tales of how the ancient ones had abandoned her kind, creating great kingdoms elsewhere in Ammon for their favored mortals. He corrupted the minds of the sorcerers with evil thoughts until all were under his influence, and from that time they harbored a great hatred for those of mortal kind, and they worshipped the Dark One, though they never knew that the Dark One was indeed Evruk, their true father and creator. Thence, in the 393rd year of the Fifth Age, the Dark One assailed the temple of the Anath in Ulain with the aid of these sorcerers, and this was the great battle of the ancients, the likes of which had never before been seen in Ammon, and never would again. Ancient fought against ancient using their great powers and armies of mortals, but the forces of the Dark One broke the temple guard and invaded the halls of the great palace. There the Dark One did slay with Kilgorin the Ancient One, known as Uthvar, and the Ancient known as Athven was slain by his army. He thence thought that there were no more of his kind upon Ammon except he. Thinking all of his brothers were now dead, he marveled that the world was now his prize and his alone to rule. Unbeknownst to him, one brother had escaped, the Ancient One known as Atnal. In the temple he found many sacred blades, including the Nasek and the Nameless Dagger, later known as the Sorcerer's Dagger. Now the Dark One had great courage and feared nothing, surmising that he had no equal to oppose him in all of Ammon. With a host of over 3,000 men and near 300 sorcerers, he journeyed west across the sea to the eastern shores of Daelindor and landed at the Bay of Voltemes. From there, his forces made a sneak attack upon the city of Amoria to the west, and it was overtaken. It was in that place that he learned of the Mithrodin and their great temples that housed the swords of power, and he purposed to possess them all. Thenceforward, all of his dark thoughts were bent to that goal, even to the end of his days. Of those original 10 swords of power, there are countless tales and legends, but there were also many other well-known swords of power crafted with the steel of the ancients that influenced the history of Ammon. Men and elves, too, forged many famous blades of their own steel, and of those there are numerous tales of triumph and tragedy.